Your hands were made for greatness. Mighty hands for painting, paneling, and clicking the submit order button on HomeDepot.com to get that duvet. And these Egyptian cotton towels delivered right to your door. Do more with decor at the Home Depot. Save up to 30% on select bedding and bath. Now at HomeDepot.com. More saving, more kinds of doing. Valid on select items online only. Free delivery on select items $45 or more. Enter promo code BEDBATH15 at purchase for an extra 15% off. Visit HomeDepot.com for more information.
Welcome, everyone, to Creating a Family. Talk about infertility and adoption. Today is a topic that I'm really excited about. It's techniques that can increase your odds of success with IVF. Kind of like what's happening in the field that's new and of course, that will increase your chances of getting pregnant. Here's a sample of what you're going to hear. With genetically tested embryos, a woman, let's say who's 40, has if her embryos have been tested, has the same chance of pregnancy as, let's say, a woman who is 30, and let's say who doesn't have her embryos tested? Wow.
Right. If they each have a chromosomally normal embryo, that chromosomally normal embryo has very similar chance in a 30-year-old versus a 40-year-old.
This show is brought to you by Creating a Family. We are the National Infertility Education and Support Nonprofit. I'm Dawn Davenport. I'm the host and the director of Creating a Family. I'm the host of this show and the director of Creating a Family. You can find us and all of our resources online at creatingafamily.org. This show is underwritten by our corporate sponsor, Ferring Pharmaceutical. Ferring has a free program they want you to know about. It's called My Fertility Navigator. You know, the Navigator programs are all kind of enraged just on every topic you can imagine right now, and it seems like everything I'm hearing about Navigator programs. And I think the reason is because people are craving that one-on-one support with, you know, as much as digitally as we are involved, it's nice sometimes to have a real human being to ask questions to, and that really is what the heart of the Navigator, the Fertility Navigator program is. You enroll in it, and once you enroll in it, you will receive a live human being, your very own fertility navigator, who can provide important information about fertility, including they can tell you where the nearby fertility clinics are, give you information about how to pay for and how to afford fertility treatment, as well as give you basic information about the different types of fertility treatment options that are available. You can get more information by going to their website, which is myfertilitynav, that's NAV.com. So pop on over there. It's a relatively new website. It's pretty snazzy. Looks pretty good, so go on over there and check them out. Today, as I said, we were going to be talking about techniques that can increase your odds of success with IVF. Our guest is Dr. Julie Lamb. She is a board-certified reproductive endocrinologist at Pacific NW Fertility in Seattle, and she serves as a clinical faculty at the University of Washington. And we're really pleased to say she is a new board member for Creating a Family. And so we are really proud and excited to have her serve on our board. And I'm thrilled to have you, Julie, on this, or Dr. Lamb, on this show today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Great. Thanks for having me, Dawn.
Okay, so we're going to talk about, I got to say, advances in the field. And where this idea, the germ of this idea is that Dr. Lamb and I ran into each other at the Pacific Coast Reproductive Symposium a couple of months ago. And we were sitting in that beautiful location, and we were chatting, and you were saying, I have to head out because I'm doing these demonstrations about embryo transfer protocol. And I said, well, you know, why are you demonstrating that? In my mind, that was just, that was a standard thing that everybody did. And you said, au contraire, that's not at all a standard thing. We're making it more standard, and hence why we're doing these demonstrations and these protocols, these training protocols. And that absolutely sparked I had no idea, and I've been involved interviewing experts for going on 11 years now, and I didn't know that was something that was not just totally a standard protocol. So let me make sure I understood correctly. Is embryo transfer a standard protocol that every doctor does the same way? Isn't this something you learn in school?
Right. Actually, it's not, Dawn. It's something that is has been traditionally more of an art than a science. And although there's been several published studies, there's not very much known about different techniques and how they improve success rates until recently. When the American Society of Reproductive Medicine put out a consensus statement looking at success rates and kind of standardizing the procedure to make it more clear. But it's not something that's taught in medical school, certainly, and it's not something that even as a fellow that the majority of fellowships actually don't even teach. You observe it, but you don't perform an embryo transfer, and that's hopefully changing. But, yeah, it's unusual. It's different, right?
Well, it was for me. I mean, I was so surprised by it, hence this show. So what you're saying is that there are – well, let me ask, does the technique that you use – and let me back up to make sure that our audience gets this. All right, so in IVF, this is going to be the most basic IVF explanation known to man or woman. So you go through an egg retrieval. The eggs are mixed with the sperm, usually in a petri dish, and at that point they grow for anywhere from 3 to 5 to 6 days, and then usually one, perhaps two embryos are going to be transferred either at that moment back at that day 5 or 6 back into the patient, or they're frozen and then thawed and at some point in the future transferred back in. So what we're talking about is the point where the embryo is taken from either its frozen straw or from the petri dish and put back into the woman's uterus with the expectation, hope, that it will implant and grow for 9 months and become a baby. So is there evidence to say that the different type of technique you might use would increase or decrease your odds of getting success? Is there research on that?
Yes, actually there is. So that how you do the technique and whether it's performed under ultrasound guidance, there is some evidence that those kinds of things improve outcomes.
Does it matter where in the uterus you eject the embryo? I mean, how far into the uterus you go?
Yeah. The goal is the middle third, but even that hadn't been well described previously until recently.
Interesting. So now they know that you're aiming for the middle third, and I would assume ultrasound assist would be preferred. I'm guessing.
Right.
Is it?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been shown to increase success rates. So ultrasound guidance is now part of it, and not avoiding any trauma to the cervix or any bleeding, and not touching the top of the uterus. All those little small nuances or points. There's evidence to make it more successful. So having that written down somewhere where new physicians and even physicians that have been doing it for years can reference and learn from and try to do it more consistently to give their patients the best outcome. Certainly every physician wants their patient to have the best possible outcome.
Absolutely. And what you were doing at the PCRS conference our symposium, was training new doctors coming in, those who had fellowships in reproductive endocrinology. Weren't you training them there?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Actually, we were holding a seminar for anyone that wanted to practice the technique on simulator models, and you didn't have to just be in training. Often seasoned physicians come and perfect their technique.
Sure. So from a patient standpoint, I'm going to guess that few patients have ever thought about this, and is this something that a patient, from a patient standpoint, what should they ask, or should they, when they're choosing a clinic?
Specifically around embryo transfer? That's a good question.
Yeah.
So I think if your physician is a board-certified reproductive endocrinologist, then they often have this information or have access to this information through the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. And one question is just asking, how many of these have you performed, and what are the success rates when you perform this procedure, given somebody my age? And all of those things are pretty well delineated, and the doctor will be able to tell you that. If someone just does several of these a year, that's not the person you necessarily want to see. Or if they have a very low success rate in your age group.
Okay, but all that information is available on the Society for Assisted Reproductive Technology site,
right.
which we often refer people to. There are the SART stats, and honestly, you can find it just by typing in Google or any of your search engine, SART
right.
statistics, and it will pop up. That's the first thing that comes up. And you can check your clinic out, and it will tell you specific information, not about embryo transfer protocol or techniques, but it will give you the number of patients in your age category and the success rate. So that information, so I guess what you're saying is that it's safe to assume that the people who are doing the best transfer protocols are going to have a higher success rate. So from a patient standpoint, you don't need to ask about their transfer protocol. You just need to look at the success rates. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's
okay.
a fair assessment. There are things that some people do to increase their success rate, like putting more embryos in, which is, a little bit, you can also see from that SART website,
yes.
Increasing your success rate by putting more embryos isn't exactly what we're looking for. I think we're going to talk about a little bit later the importance of single embryo transfer and one healthy baby at a time. But yeah, looking at their single embryo transfer rates and success rates with one embryo is what you want to ask about.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about that, because certainly one of the, and I'm using air quotes around the word advancement, but because I don't know if this wasn't what I was initially thinking about when you and I were thinking about the show, but one advancement is the significant push by the reproductive endocrinology field towards single embryo transfer, and that is a bandwagon that Creating a Family jumped on at the very beginning and has been singing that song, to mix my metaphors, for a very long time. So let's talk a little about the single embryo transfer. And you alluded to a question that I had. I've been trying to follow over the years what that we know that we want to reduce multiple births because of the health risks to the babies and the health risk to the pregnancy itself, as well as to the woman. We tend as a society to downplay the risks of twins, but the reality is clear when you look at large studies that twin pregnancies, the pregnancy itself is at a higher risk. The babies are at a significantly higher risk for premature birth, and there are more and more research that indicates the long-term, lifelong even, impacts, subtle and not so subtle, from prematurity, as well as risks to the mom. So that's my spiel. That is my soapbox. I'm now getting off of the soapbox. But the reason that we hear from people, and we hear, I would like to say that we were so persuasive that most people now want single embryo transfer. I don't know that we definitely see an increase in people who are open to it, patients, I should say. But what is the success rates? What's the latest research show on the success rates when you transfer one embryo, and by success I mean live baby, versus transferring two embryos?
That's a great question. So I think the national average for a chromosomally screened embryo is about 60%. Live birth rate with a single embryo transfer. So we see a very similar success rate. If we put back two, it's slightly higher, but a very high chance of twins. And that, as you mentioned, is exactly what we want to avoid. Giving a couple or an individual a single healthy baby at a time is the number one goal. The biggest thing we can do to give people healthy children is to not give them more than one at a time. When we cause a twin pregnancy, even if it's not intentional, just to increase success rate, those children have a higher risk of all sorts of medical concerns, just related to the risk of being born, or the higher risk of being born early.
Yeah, and some of it's interesting when you follow twins and you follow into their academic success and their, how they do in school and all sorts of subtle things. You can often tell the difference. It's not subtle. I mean, well, it may be subtle, but it's not. It's certainly statistically significant. Unfortunately, and I get it from a patient's standpoint that often if they've been waiting for a very long time, that's hard to think one at a time. All right, so
Right.
that has certainly
And
been an advance. Go ahead.
Right. Another thing that's totally advanced with that is I think it used to be that your best chance of success was with that fresh embryo transfer. And now there's equipoise. There's equality between fresh and frozen, and it's often better to transfer a frozen embryo. So there's not that need to put in multiple embryos fresh because the success rate is just as good with frozen. So you're able to put one in at a time without sacrificing the success rate of each embryo. And I think that's really important change that's happened in the field in the last 10 years.
It is, and it's fascinating to me. And I'm not sure that we know all the reasons, but isn't one of the reasons is that the woman's body has a chance to normalize after having been inundated with a large number of medications, drugs to help produce a lot of eggs. So that normalizing allows a woman's body, and that's so I guess the realization that that matters and that it could be beneficial to wait. And then I don't know. Does that? Go ahead.
You're absolutely right. The other thing that's changed is that fast freezing method of vitrification that's become the standard of care. So that quick freezing method allows no damage to be done to the embryo or the egg. And that also is what gives the frozen embryo transfer the very high success rate.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. It's so counterintuitive. That we don't think of anything frozen as being preferable to fresh, and yet in this case, the evidence would suggest otherwise. Another major advancement, and one that's been, probably I don't know how far back, but it feels very recent, and that is the huge advances in genetic testing of embryos. Tell us some about that.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So now, or for the last few years or decade, we've been able to take a few cells of the embryo that become the placenta and test them for their genetic complement of chromosomes. So counting that chromosome number is what allows us to give the high success rates with a single embryo. So it used to be that we needed to rely on the body to do that testing. If you're not pregnant from an embryo, even though it looks beautiful under the microscope and it just doesn't cause a baby, the most common reason is that it didn't have the right number of chromosomes. So being able to check that is what allows us to give that really high success rate and avoid things like miscarriage or negative pregnancy tests or babies that have problems. So that ultimately has given the success rate, even at 38 or 40, makes it similar to someone who's in their 20s once you have a normal chromosome embryo, which is really exciting.
Oh, okay. Say that again now. You're saying that let me repeat to make sure I got it. With genetically tested embryos, a woman, let's say who's 40, has if her embryos have been tested, has the same chance of pregnancy as, let's say, a woman who is 30, and let's say who doesn't have her embryos tested? Wow.
Right. If they each have a chromosomally normal embryo, that chromosomally normal embryo has very similar chance in a 30-year-old versus a 40-year-old. So as we age, that's the component that becomes abnormal. So we're born with all those eggs, and as we age, the percentage of abnormal eggs increases. So screening, especially with advancing age, screening for that correct chromosomal complement is what allows us to give success rates from single embryo transfers to mothers of advanced reproductive age. It's very exciting.
It is very exciting. I guess keeping in mind that as you age, the odds of getting a genetically normal embryo decrease as you age.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
Yeah, so I mean there's, and keeping in mind that there's a cost. Yeah, if you can find one, right. Yeah, and depending on after a certain age, right.
Right, so not allowing the body to do the testing takes some of the stress off of your body and allows, us to tell in the lab which one is most likely to make a baby.
Yeah, your body and your mind and your soul and everything else, right.
Right,
yeah.
right,
yeah.
Exactly. it takes less emotional energy when it kind of happens outside of you, and when you're not having to wait those 2 weeks to find out if you're pregnant. And if there's not normal ones, you can do another cycle, and you're not wondering what's wrong with your body that it didn't implant. So from a patient care perspective, I found that it's much easier to have a conversation with a patient about embryos than why am I not pregnant from those beautiful embryos? It can look perfect under the microscope, and we can put it back in, and it still feels like it's somehow it still feels very personal and like your fault if you're not pregnant, even though I can say, statistically, your embryo was untested. It's most likely that the embryo is abnormal. It's still very, of course, it's very hard on women to not be pregnant. So having that externalized and outside the body and say, hey, your embryos are beautiful. We just didn't find a normal one this month. Let's try again. It's a lot easier to try again when you know the reason.
Well, and it also is decreasing the odds of a baby, of an embryo growing into a fetus and ultimately a baby with birth defects as well.
Right.
Right. The body doesn't always. Is not always a good, testing from, some significant birth defects. So that's genetic testing of embryos has been, and gosh, it just feels to me like it's, honestly, I can remember when we started this show way back 11 years ago, that it was, none of this was even, it just seems almost humorous as to how we tried to do genetic testing then. So it feels like it's been so recent. Maybe it isn't, but it sure feels that way.
Right. And it's just improved so much over the last few years. It's really exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the more exciting things. Let me pause to remind everybody that you are listening to Creating a Family. We are talking today with Dr. Julie Lamb about techniques that can increase your odds of success with IVF. I wanted to take a moment to remind you that this show, as well as all the resources produced by Creating a Family, could not happen without the generous support of our partners. One of those partners is Reproductive Medicine Associates of New York. They are one of the largest fertility practices in the state of New York and one of the biggest in the country. By combining the latest innovations in reproductive science with compassionate and customized treatment plans, RMA of New York is able to provide the best possible care. All right, Dr. Lamb, we're talking about advances, and we've talked about something as mundane as how you transfer, although it's really not mundane, but embryos, and something as esoteric as moving towards the single embryo transfer, and then something that's absolutely seems so far out there, which is genetic testing of embryos, although now genetic testing doesn't seem that far out there. Let's move to talking about another big push across all medicine, it feels to me, and that is personalized treatment. But in this case, let's talk about personalized infertility treatment. What are some ways that the reproductive endocrinologist can assess the woman or the man, but in this case it's going to be usually the woman, who is there and what her individual needs are? Embryo testing is certainly one of them. What are some other things that ways that infertility treatment can now be personalized for that specific woman?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dawn. So there's some really, simple things. Just sitting down with your physician and telling your story and looking at the details of your menstrual cycle and your history and, all of those reproductive history questions really make the plan personalized to the individual. And I think that's a really important conversation. But there's some more things in the last few years that really personalize medicine to the individual, and the examples of those are a specific example is the endometrial receptivity assay, which actually looks at the gene expression in a woman's uterus to find out if it's susceptible to the embryo at the right time, which has been a really exciting thing in personalized medicine and reproductive health care.
And is that the same thing as the window of implantation, that period of time when your uterus is most receptive to implantation? Does the ERA help determine when that time is?
Yes. Yes, that's a good question. It's mainly specifically for IVF and embryo transfer. It doesn't necessarily help you if you're trying individually on your own or with an insemination, but it does help in some patients, in a very specific patient population that's having implantation failure. There's the potential that it helps us understand, the genes that are expressed in that uterus and whether it's ready for an embryo. And the way we adjust that gene expression is by changing the timing of the progesterone administration. So seems like a relatively simple thing, but it's pretty amazing science. It's like your own little DNA footprint, looking at that before we put an embryo back.
So you do the ERA test or assay, and then you can determine what medication to give to alter the results and hold off on the transfer until we get the results that you're looking for. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right, exactly. So it's actually performed in a mock cycle, a mock embryo transfer cycle, where we grow the lining with estrogen and we treat, once it's thick enough by transvaginal ultrasound, we treat the patient with progesterone, and then instead of transferring the embryo on the correct day, we actually do an endometrial biopsy, which is a little sampling of a little tiny bit of the lining of the uterus, and send that, and they look at the expression and the specific DNA fingerprint, kind of the gene expression in that uterus at that time, and it's different for different people. And making sure that lines up with where they want the embryo and when it needs to implant is important in some patient populations. So,
and is this something that you do typically with all patients, or those patients who have had implantation failures?
That's a good question. No one really knows the answer to that yet. Right now, we're using it in a very, very specific patient population. So patients that have had implantation failure of embryos that were chromosomally normal that we expected to be successful that weren't. Those patients are the best candidates for the current patients that we're talking to about this technique. Also, we're starting to introduce this idea for patients that have very few embryos. So, they did several cycles to get one embryo, or I recently used it for a cancer patient who had a bone marrow transplant and only had one embryo. So when it's not a renewable resource and it's their only chance of pregnancy, we want to do everything possible to make sure it's going to implant. But right now, I personally am not using it for every patient, but I think there are some doctors that are at least talking to every patient about it. So knowledge is power. Like when patients ask about it, we talk about it, we give patients resources, and it won't be long before we're talking to every patient about things like this. And you don't know what's next. Like, how are we going to personalize medicine even further in fertility? It's really exciting time.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, that begs the question, is insurance paying for it, if you were fortunate enough to have insurance?
Right. Some of them are.
Good.
Some or will reimburse the patient for the test. But oftentimes, just the cycle medications are so cost prohibitive, and no one wants to wait 2 months to do another test, and all those play into the decision-making process too. It's a pretty invasive test to go into the uterus and sample part of the lining. We try to make it sound pretty gentle, but no one wants to have that done either. It's a conversation. Point. And it's very individualized for the patient about whether it's right for them. So, definitely talk to your doctor about what your options are for testing and the pros and cons of these kinds of testing for you.
Okay, that's fascinating. I have always been fascinated by the idea of the culture medium that we use to grow the embryos. And I really don't know the answer to the question I'm getting ready to ask. Has there been advances in what medium we use? It seems like it is such a fundamentally important thing that we're doing. And have there been advances in the last, say, 5 years in what the type of medium that we use, and the culture, and or whether you change it or how you do it? How do you stick them in a petri dish and just let them grow, or do you do something different, or what?
Yes. Well, an embryologist would probably be able to answer that question more precisely than I would. But from a physician point of view, it's something that has been a big part of the process for many years. And it used to be very proprietary, and people wouldn't share their protocols. And now there's pretty standardized medias, and they're available commercially. And those are constantly being tweaked for the best success rate. And you're right. Some are changed, and we call that sequential media. And some medias, you keep the egg and or the embryo in throughout that 5-day, 6-day culture process. And so as far as I know, there haven't been any huge revelations in the last few years. The best way to kind of ask about that is to ask about like blast formation rate and in your clinic, and what do they see for your age group. And there's a lot, the standard deviation is wide, and certainly how the embryo develops can be very personal and very individual, but that the average gives you a little bit of an idea about what the success rates are with culturing the embryos. And the lab, you're right, is a very important piece of all this, and choosing the right media is an important decision, and that's usually made by the physician and the embryologist as a team.
Yeah, I think that we tend to not think as much about the embryology lab and the embryologist and that end of things. And maybe it's just because of the way my brain works, but I'm fascinated by it. So I think as patients, as general, often don't focus on that because they're not interacting with the embryologist or the people. They're focusing on the doctor because that's whom they are talking with. But and there's been I don't know if this is considered an advancement because it's relatively new. We did a show on it. I think it was last year with Dr. Kevin Duty, but it's in vivo maturation, in vivo culture. You want to explain that just kind of briefly, and then we'll refer people back to that show because we talked about it for an hour. But, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great topic. So basically, the human body or the woman's ovary contains kind of a purse or a collection of immature eggs. And the best way we have to get them out is to mature them inside the woman's body. And to take them out and to fertilize them in the lab, they need to be mature. So usually the immature eggs are discarded, but there's new techniques that so far are still considered experimental of maturing the eggs in the in vitro fertilization laboratory, in the embryology laboratory. And that's certainly something that's being investigated, especially for cancer patients or patients that aren't ovulating or looking for in less expensive ways to undergo this process. Right now, we can only get a group of eggs out that would normally die away in a given month. We get them to mature and remove them. But if there is a more efficient way, often women have hundreds of eggs left, if not thousands. And if we could get more of those, then we're more likely to find what we're looking for in a single cycle and make the process more efficient. So I think that's some of the goals of those in vitro maturation studies.
Yeah, I think
very few clinics use it clinically currently.
Right. And then there is the another technique aligned with this, if I understand it correctly, and where rather than allowing the embryo to once the sperm and the egg have joined, but they allow the embryo, they place the embryo back into the vaginal cavity and allow rather than a petri dish. With the idea that that's a more, and again, I'm using air quotes here, natural environment, although honestly, the vaginal cavity is different from the fallopian tubes, which is where that would be, but I suppose it's closer. And that's another technique that's, I think some clinics are actually utilizing now with some patients.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very common, but yes, there are a smattering of clinics throughout the U.S. that are looking at those options. Yeah,
looking at the options, and that one in particular is known to that one of the goals is to save money. All right, so we've been talking about, I guess, before we leave the all-important embryology lab, anything else you can think of that's happened, let's say, in the last 5 years that has resulted in increased birth rates. I'll throw one out that I don't really know if it falls within the 5-year, but air filtration. Again, talk about mundane. But I read a study, or it was discussed, I think at ASRM, it feels like quite a few years ago, but perhaps within the 5-year window, of different successes for labs that use certain types of air filtration. Did you hear that? Is that something that you know anything about?
Yes, air filtration is something we talk about on a regular basis in an IVF clinic. Yes, it's a very important part of the process, and no one does any painting or polishing or cleaning in the embryology laboratory ever, because those toxins and all those normal things of everyday life can affect embryo development. So it's a huge topic of conversation, and something that we're really careful about. Even if we paint in the clinic, we only do it during, which is very separate from the embryology laboratory, and it's done at a time when there's no embryos in the lab, and at a time where we can spend lots of time filtering the air before we start up again.
Fascinating. I mean, that really, you think about that. It's just stuff you don't think about.
Right.
I am
right.
so
The
thankful.
Embryology lab is.
Yeah,
is positive pressure, so nothing can ever flow in. Everything is flowing out, and all sorts of filtration systems keeping that air quality as perfect as possible in there.
When people, and I totally get the complaint, but when people complain about the cost of IVF, you have to think through all of these things we're talking about. It's all of them are important, and all of them cost. So I find it just absolutely fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Unfortunately, all of healthcare is very costly, and we're not used to paying for a lot of our own healthcare. We're used to it being covered by insurance. So when it's not,
Bingo.
it's expensive. You're right. It's terrible.
You're right, and when we're not used to paying, and so when we are having to pay out of pocket, but that's a whole another soapbox I could get on, but
Yes.
I won't. For the sake of this show, and so we don't want to lose everybody. I'm limited by our staff to just one soapbox per show, and I used it up for single embryo transfer, so I'm going to have to move on now.
Yes, I think that's great. All soapboxes are very important for your listeners to hear.
There you go. Yeah, but important, but maybe not quite entertaining.
Right.
Have there been any, let's talk a little about egg retrieval techniques. Okay. And have there been anything new that we need to know about in the egg retrieval? Start us off by kind of filling us in on
Yes.
what's the standard done and anything that's new and different.
Yes. So an egg retrieval is when we go in and it's a procedure that's done at the end of an IVF cycle, where we go in and get the eggs outside of a woman. So a woman can't ejaculate her eggs like a guy can give us sperm much more easily. It's another gender discrepancy, Dawn, where it's much more difficult to get eggs. The eggs are found in the follicles, and once at the exact right time, we go in and get them. And the way we do that is with a tiny little needle, kind of like the needle we use to draw blood, but it's long, and it goes transvaginally, and it's ultrasound guided. So we see the ultrasound by ultrasound, just like you would measure your follicle in a fertility clinic. And at the end of the probe, there's a tiny little needle, and it goes into the ovary through the top of the vagina and sucks out that fluid. And with the fluid in the follicle comes the little microscopic egg. And so that's what a retrieval is. And the technique has changed some over the years. I think the needle's gotten smaller. It used to be a double bore needle where they could flush the follicle, and now we just aspirate the follicle, and the success rates are very good retrieving those eggs. But the actual technique itself probably hasn't changed very much. So
you get all the fluid.
Yeah.
And you suck out the fluid, and you're hoping it usually, or that there's more than one
Yes.
egg. How do you separate the egg at that point from the fluid?
Yes. So the little tiny egg goes through the end of the needle and through a tubing into a little not a petri dish, but a little test tube. And the test tube is in a warmer that's kept at body temperature. It's very important that the egg temperature doesn't fall even a degree. It's very important that they're kept at body temperature. And they're given to an embryologist that's in the room with us. And our embryologist has like an incubator, like you would see a NICU baby be in, a tiny little preemie baby. But instead of a baby in there, it's your little tiny eggs. And that allows them to temperature control it. And they have a microscope right there looking at the eggs in the retrieval room with us. And they're pulling them right out of the fluid under the microscope.
Cool. And
isn't it exciting? I know.
And then they're either frozen if you're freezing eggs, or they are
right.
Allowed to combine with sperm, or I suppose you also injected with sperm if you're using intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Yeah, it is kind of cool, but nothing new on the horizon that's exciting and
right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. It's a pretty quick process. Patients go to sleep for it. No one really likes a needle in their vagina, but it's not a big incision or a big surgery. It's just a small procedure.
Right. Yeah. And you're out for a very short time generally.
Right. Right. And you wake up and feeling good that it's behind you.
Yeah. Exactly. And hopefully getting good news.
Hopefully you never have to do it again.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, we got two questions that are similar. I'm going to read them both, and they both talk about there are both questions about why some doctors use one protocol and some use another. The first is from Lulu, and she says, I get that treatment has to depend on your diagnosis and condition, but does it also depend on what the doctor is used to and prefers? How standardized is fertility treatment? Not sure if that's a good thing or not. And then another similar question from Aaron. Why do clinics have such different approaches? For example, some docs feel strongly about using omnitrope, testosterone, etc. before stimulation, while others are staunchly against it. So, I thought both questions were similar in who decides what the protocol is going to be, and is it only based on the diagnosis, or are we moving towards more standardization or less?
That's an excellent question. I think it's a very personalized approach for each individual patient, but also individualized by each individual doctor and clinic. According to the first question, we're picking a protocol based on the best outcomes and for the patient. And our clinic tries to be very evidence-based and based on the current research. We don't want patients paying a lot, toward the second question about, adding kind of alternative therapies such as growth hormone or testosterone. There's some alternatives that are controversial, I guess is a good way to put it. And some doctors feel like they definitely see a different success rate when they use that, and other doctors feel like there's not enough evidence for that specific treatment, and that each of these medication is expensive and really expensive, and some of them have specifically the testosterone some untoward side effects. That can be really bothersome. So without an evidence that it's improving outcomes, being live birth rates or number of eggs, a lot of us feel like it's not in the best interest of the patient to give them. But that being said, a lot of us are open to conversation, and if a patient really wants to try a kind of an alternative therapy, I'm definitely interested in hearing their thoughts and having it be a discussion and a conversation about the pros and cons and what might be best for that patient. So it goes back to just really personalizing the medical treatment and the medical care, and same thing with the protocols. So the specific protocol is very patient dependent, but you're right, it's also very clinic dependent, and but basically each protocol is doing the same thing, Dawn. It's growing the eggs inside the woman's body. And we put a lot of weight on the protocol and the differences in protocols, but pretty much your ovaries do what they want to do. And we try to tweak a lot of things, and sometimes it doesn't make any difference.
Well, yeah, and
your body gives us what it wants to give us.
Yeah. And as I read the questions, as I was thinking of those questions, I'd like to, you said, the your clinic focuses on evidence-based, and it makes me think in terms of that's why we send patients to look at the SART stats, because then you can compare, because as a patient, most of us don't have the medical knowledge, even if we've studied this. Don't have the medical knowledge of being able to say, I think I should be having slightly more progesterone or slightly less, or I really think I need. That's beyond us. I mean, you have gone to boatloads of years of school. I mean, way more school than I want to go to, and to learn this. And so it's not up to. I don't want to question it. But that's where the stats come in, because they're not going to lie. I mean, so if you can compare and say, I don't know what you're doing protocol-wise, but I can look and see that your success rate. And again, you need to look at it for your age group, because that matters. But I can see that your success rate is not as high as others, or is higher, or whatever clinic you're looking at, and you can make your decision based on that. Is that a fair thing to do to use the stats that way?
Yes, there's good and bad about that. That's the best marker we have at the current time, but it's not perfect either. I often let a patient go through the process that has a very low success rate because it's her only chance of having a genetic child, and often these patients are turned away from many other clinics. And so that, doesn't improve our START statistics, but it's very, individual patient care is more important to me than what is reported on that national website. Same thing with single embryo transfer. There's clinics that put 2 embryos in every time to try to improve that number on the website. So, yes, it's the best marker that we have, but it has, just like anything, it has flaws too. But yes, it's always good to talk with your doctor and ask your question. If my patient's worried about the level of progesterone or the protocol, I want to know that, and I want to explain it to them and answer their questions. It's really important for me to have a team approach with a patient and have them feel listened to and heard, and take what they're worried about into consideration and talk about it.
Yeah, we did a Creating a Family show a number of years ago when the formatting of the SART stats changed, and there are ways that you can assess. You can't look at any just one statistic, but you raise a good point. There are definitely clinics, and an example of that would be clinics who won't accept a woman over the age of 40 or even 40 or over. There are clinics that will not accept a woman over 40 or over unless she agrees to do a donor egg, even with the first cycle. And now those clinics, when we speak with them, they say, well, we're doing that because there's no reason to. Her success rate is going to be so low. It's wrong to do. But that certainly for some women, knowing that they tried, assuming they've got the money for it, they want to try. And yes, that would result in a lower overall statistics of success for the clinic who says, I respect your desire to try, and I'm going to tell you what your success rates are, but allow you to make the decision. So, yeah. I do refer people back. Difference. It does, and so I refer people back to that show. The show is titled something with new IVF statistics, analyzing how to analyze the new IVF statistics, or I may just say IVF statistics. Go back to that because we actually, it seems overwhelming when you look at the SART, but we analyzed and broke it down to the couple that really mean the most that you need to look at and that you can compare those, and it's truly not overwhelming. We need to do a blog or something on that. We actually have that information in. We have a guide on how to choose an infertility clinic, and you can get that on. It is, and we did screenshots that walk you through literally step by step of which of the statistics are the most important for you to analyze when comparing clinics, trying to take some of the variability out. For clinics who might be trying to up their success rates, but it's not in the. For instance, you need to look at the percentage of twin births, the percentage of procedures that have double embryo transfer. Things like that are just as important as success. So Anyway, that guide you can get going to our website, creatingafamily.org, and hover on online resources and click on guide, or hover over resources rather, and click on guide, and it pops right up, and you can access it there. It's got a lot of other great information there as well. All right, let me take a break and reintroduce you. We're talking today about techniques that can increase your odds of success with IVF with Dr. Julie Lamb. And I wanted to remind everybody that this show and everything we do here at Creating a Family, we're a nonprofit and we depend upon the professional community for our support. And one of our, and these are people who believe, these are not people, organizations who believe in our mission, which is to provide unbiased, medically accurate information to the patient community. And we couldn't exist without them. And one of them is Manhattan Cryobank. They are dedicated to helping clients have healthy babies by analyzing a client's DNA in combination with the DNA of prospective sperm donors. And by doing that, they can provide the client with a personalized catalog of safer donor matches. And in addition to donor sperm services, they also have a full range of andrology and fertility preservation services as well. All right, we got a couple of questions that I'm going to kind of lump together, and I'm glad we got these because this is what people, our patients, are actually wondering about because we hear it a lot in our support group. The first one I'll read is from Tanya. She says, I begin injections at the end of the month. Is there anything I should do or know during that time? Also, I will have 4 weeks between egg removal and transfer. Anything I should know and do during that waiting period?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So certainly taking care of yourself like you're pregnant during that time of growing the eggs and preparing your body for transfer. So, eating healthy foods, lots of fruits and vegetables, avoiding toxins, avoiding things like processed foods, and not drinking and not smoking and taking your prenatal vitamin. All of those things make your body as perfect as possible for getting ready for a transfer. But one important thing that I think we often forget is just taking really good care of ourselves. So building up your emotional energy in case it doesn't work, and to make the process more. It's never going to be easy, but more tolerable when you take good care of yourself and pay attention to your emotional and physical needs with whatever way you can, whether it's going to yoga or doing some mindful meditation or getting enough sleep and eating the right foods. All of those increase your ability to handle the process and tolerate the outcome. And keep trying, because each individual egg and embryo has a good chance, and being in the right place to get ready for that improves your odds and improves your ability to keep trying.
Yeah, and I would throw in, if you're partnered, have a date night with your partner, and go out for a girls' night out. Cultivate your friendships. Don't stop living your life.
Right.
So we so often do stop living our life when we're so focused on one thing, which is an important thing to focus on. But enjoying your life in between can give you the emotional reserves to stay the course and make it through the process, because not every transfer is going to be successful, and you don't want to be so worn out that you're not able, We're certainly focused here on creating a family, on reducing the dropout rate, and that is such a we did a show was it last week or week before with the author of it's a really popular book. I think it's one of the New York Times bestsellers. It's called Mommy Burnout, and there was something fascinating. Now, she was talking about parenthood, but she talked about the importance of female friendships. It was aimed at mothers, so she was focusing on females, and about the amount of research that exists about how important friendships are for coping, for just general mental health. So having read that book, it's certainly it's number one on my head about focusing on that.
Yes. It's so easy to become isolated when you're going through fertility care, and I think that's one of the things I encourage patients the most is surround yourself with people that support you and can help you through this. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, you need those relationships, and hopefully by the completion of your fertility treatment, you have a family and a baby. But even if you don't, you have to have a good marriage and a good sex life and friendships and all those, and like who you are. And so working on that along the way is so important.
It is. And also, as you point out, often overlooked. Yeah, because we become obsessed,
right.
quite frankly. Yeah. All right. Then we have
lot.
It is a lot. It's a lot to. It's hard to do self-care
right.
in the midst of all of this. We have a question from Erin. Is there anything I can do to improve my egg quality? She doesn't tell us where she is in the process, so I don't know the answer to that.
There's not a lot you can do to improve egg quality. It's based on age, really. But there's a book. Am I allowed to say a name of a book?
Sure, absolutely.
I think it's
Please
called, it's about the egg, or starts with the egg. And that book, I can't even tell you the author, but it just really systematically goes through evidence-based approach based on research of one patient's journey through the process and what she did to try to improve her egg quality. And it goes through kind of the toxins in her life she eliminated with facial products and cleaning products and household products, and then some evidence-based approach to supplements like CoQ10 and what she did and feels like increased her egg quality. So there's certainly some flaws with that kind of approach, is that, when a study's published that found a difference and maybe an improvement in pregnancy rates, it's published. But when a study doesn't find results, it's not published. So there's some bias in what's published, and then we, collect all the published studies and say these make a difference. But usually I try to encourage people that it's not keeping you from getting pregnant. All those things in your life, it's good to clean that up and to pay attention. But oftentimes you get all that information, it's a little overwhelming. So it's important to know it's not the cause of your infertility. But I totally agree, when we're doing everything possible to improve our chances of success with this process, then we do look at those things that might have an impact on egg quality.
And the title of that book is It Starts with the Egg: How the Science of Egg Quality Can Help You Get Pregnant Naturally, Prevent Miscarriage, and Improve Your Odds in IVF. And the author is Rebecca Fett. It was published in 2014, so 4 years ago. But I would think there's probably been some studies that have come out in the interim, but that's only 4 years ago, so that's not
not very long. It's an excellent book. It's actually very good, and I've read it several times, and I have patients that really like it. I do have patients that get a little overwhelmed when reading it. It's a lot of information. But when you're looking specifically on, what are all the things that people try to do to increase egg quality, that's a great resource.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm glad I'm glad you told me about it. Yeah, we'll have that, and we'll add that to our
and great
suggested.
question. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you, Erin, for asking. So what in the past, when we've discussed this, it's with other experts, it's the advances always felt like advances in the treatment of infertility always felt like they were more successful, more focused on younger women rather than older women. Now, genetic testing is certainly, we talked about that at the beginning, that certainly has altered the odds for older women. What, as far as, is genetic testing really the whole ball of wax as far as success for, by older, let's say 38 or up? Are we not seeing the increase in pregnancy rates in that age group? Has that remained rather stubbornly low, or are they increasing?
Yes, so certainly the success rates are increasing in that advanced reproductive age success group. We certainly see that population growing with the national statistics. When we just looked at all those population statistics that came out, big article in the New York Times that birth rates are falling, and the only group that it's increasing in is at age 40 to 44. And I don't think necessarily that's advancements in egg quality or better egg quality with older. It's just more of us trying at advanced reproductive age, and more of us having support and resources to try, and genetic testing. and insurance coverage, and then all of us just, delaying pregnancy while we pursue the right partner or pursue a degree or complete things in our career. So certainly those reproductive years are changing a little bit, and it's very common. 50% of women over 40 need some kind of assistance getting pregnant. So that all impacts and plays a role in the higher success rates in those age groups that we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, when I was just listening to a podcast, and I wanted to jump through the guest was saying that the success rates are so large now that really our biological clock is no longer relevant, that you could postpone. And I thought, no. I think her point, she was trying to say that that the postponing postponing child birth or pregnancy is inevitable, but what she didn't say was, yes, but if you have the money, if in IVF, and even then it's not going to be always our donor egg. Yeah, so I know I this literally was this week, and I was like, I wished I could jump through the airwaves and say no. That I hear your bigger point is trying to reassure women, but don't reassure them with false information. The biological
I think it's really important. Yeah, to learn about your biological clock, to learn about your fertility. Certainly egg freezing isn't right for everybody, but it's an option. Just being aware that it's not as easy to get pregnant as we get older. And I think there's this misconception that IVF can just fix things for women late 30s, and that's not the case. Yes,
that isn't the case. And it's also not the case. It also overlooks the fact that infertility treatment is not inexpensive, and many, many women do not have insurance that covers it. So I always feel like I have to say that, because we know people who are in our support group all the time who are really struggling with the financial aspect of it. So anyway, I feel like that does a disservice to all of them. Well, Dr. Julie Lamb,
more
thank
about
you so
education.
Much. Oh, yeah, exactly. More, but that surprised me.
More
that
education.
Somebody, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I really think we're making progress in that area, though. I really do. You don't hear people say that much anymore, or maybe I just want to believe that we're making progress.
Yes.
Yeah, that's possible as well. Well, Dr. Julie Lamb, thank you so much for being on the Creating a Family show today. I have I always thoroughly enjoy talking with you. And again, thank you. I know that there's going to be people who want to reach out to you to get more information, and you can, Pacific Northwest Fertility is where Dr. Lamb practices, and that website is pnwfertility.com, pnwfertility.com. Keep in mind that the information given in this interview is general advice. To understand how it applies to your specific situation, you need to work with your infertility professional. Thank you guys for being here, and I will see you all next week.
Right now at the Home Depot, you'll save up to 35% off appliance special buys, like a GE Appliances top-load washer and dryer pair, with deep clean and deep rinse options, a reliable heavy-duty agitator, and 4 precise water levels, just $4.78 each. Wash, dry, save, repeat. Today is the day for doing, with Spring Black Friday savings now at the Home Depot. More saving, more doing. U.S. only while supplies last. Gas dryer extra. See store for details. Valid through April 17th.
Come to the Home Depot this month and you'll learn a thing or two. Actually, 3, with 3 free do-it-yourself workshops. Learn how to design and care for your container garden by selecting the best soil and aesthetically arranging your plants. Learn how to install tile flooring, even how to keep your outdoor deck and patio space in the best shape possible. See, it's never too late to learn something new. Register today at homedepot.com/workshops for a do-it-yourself workshop near you. Only at the Home Depot. More saving, more doing.